other than this right that you are talking about, which is that we reimpose quantitative restrictions, which we were able to do before 1995, which is essentially in layman's term banning of imports of a certain kind. Minus this step, is it possible for us to extricate ourselves out of the impact of the agreement on agriculture that the Indian farming sector and Indian peasants see themselves in?
It was really the whole idea of the SP and SSM, that is the special products and the special safeguard measures. That whole logic arose out of this. Yes. Short of quantitative restrictions, what could we do? So, the idea was at least there will be some products which will be kept away from tariff reduction, so that high tariff or whatever tariff protection we can give it according, and that selection of such products should be our concern, not the concern of the multilateral body or the other parties. And the second was, in case because of the tariff reduction the import surges take place, then how do we handle them? So, these were the two measures. So, if we do not have the right kind of a measure, then we go to the second or third kind of
third order of trying to remedy the situation.
Now, there our own people said that 30% of products, that is the agricultural tariff lines. So, we have some 716 or such tariff lines. So, I was told by the Commerce Secretary that Americans have agreed that we will have the right to take away as large a percentage as 30% of our tariff lines.
So, you can safeguard 30% of your products.
Now, even that will not be much, because if you have 715 or so many lines, you know, in India so many agricultural products at so many places, and it is not as if they are always substitutable by some imported thing, whether it is soya, whether it is coconut oil or whatever.
Right.
So, even that is not a foolproof protection, but fine if you are getting a leeway to protect 30%. Now, what is the situation today? That 30% has come down to 12%. The draft last year which was given up was 8%. Now, I am told that they are going further to about 12%. Now, 12% means about 35 lines.
So, you would still say the best option we have is reimposition of
right to reimpose.
Right to reimpose QRs, quantitative restrictions. But our negotiating team has never talked about this.
This was even before the round started.
No, I am saying after 1995, have we ever
we have never raised this. We have never raised it.
Why not?
Well, you know, partly the technical argument is that the whole idea of agricultural agreement was to move away from the things like waivers which the Americans had in 50s, to move away from the kind of variable levy and other practices which the Europeans had, which were all anti-GATT, which were GATT incompatible practices. And then they said that the quantitative restrictions that India used were on the ground of balance of payment.
No, but when farmers are dying, should we actually be so careful about technical arguments?
In fact, you know, even if they were not dying, because dying is one thing which is very obvious, but to continue living in a state of deprivation is as bad, and this is the state of Indian peasantry. Now, in order to give them a little better environment, we have to have as a nation a right to protect them in a time of danger. We have surrendered it.
So, let us move on to the other big issue, which is NAMA, non-agricultural market access. And from what we understand, the whole debate is around the formula that is to be used in order to derive tariffs, and which has been called the Swiss formula. So, just for us to understand, what is this Swiss formula that is being attempted to be used, and how does it have an impact on interests of India and other developing countries?
In India, currently, if you see, our average rate of tariff protection for industrial products is 30%.
By tariff protection, you mean that you put a duty
on the imports, the customs duty on imports.
So that local industry
So
is
legally, so that
safeguarded.
local industry is protected. Now, that level is 30% in law, but in practice, in the name of liberalization, in the name of liberalizing trade and giving opportunity and so called promoting efficiency, the applied tariff is at the level of around 10% on average. So, the in industrial countries, it is already at the say 4 to 6%. Now, the Swiss formula is basically a formula which will harmonize the rates of tariffs everywhere. Now, harmonization can take place only by reducing the higher tariffs to a lower level, because they are not going to raise their tariffs to harmonize. So, the harmonization formula, which is the underlying principle of the Swiss formula, is basically to bring down the high tariffs. Now, bringing down the high tariffs in how do we bring it slower or quickly? That is the whole thing. Now, we need not go into the technicalities of the coefficient and this and that, but ultimately you have to reduce tariff. Earlier what used to happen, you had the freedom saying that all right, on average I will cut my bound tariff by say 20%. We had the freedom. And then how do I apply it? I will apply it in terms of my own priority. I see the vulnerability more in some sector, I will not reduce it. I will see some sectors are more developed and they can stand the competition, I will reduce it more. So, I have the policy instrument to distribute the impact in a fair manner.
And selectively reduce tariffs in
where
areas that are not vulnerable.
Not hurt, where it will not hurt. Now, the first principle of Swiss formula is that this flexibility is gone. You have to do the tariff cutting line by line. Every line must have a tariff cut. The process should be fast, so the coefficient should be larger, and the exceptions will be minimal. Flexibility will be minimal. Now, all this ultimately means that you have to reduce your tariffs to a low level in a very quick way and without any discretion of making exceptions to it. That is the essence of the Swiss formula. First we said we will not accept the Swiss formula. Ultimately we accepted. So, that was the first dilution.
Why have you?
Well, again the same negotiations. Why did we give up the right to impose quantitative restrictions? Because we believe as liberalizers that ultimately tariffs have to go. It is the efficiency which has to be promoted, and in the process if some industries close down, well, that is the price you pay for transforming the Indian productive structure to a globally competitive structure. That is the theory
or a globally subservient structure.
Well, I mean they call it globally competitive structure. So, whatever. So, this Swiss formula was the first surrender. In the Swiss formula, they tried to put some degree of flexibility. That flexibility has been reduced. Number of conditions that has been reduced. Now, actually the kind of thing that is being now more or less taken as a product of the negotiations is where your bound rate will be near the applied rate. So, the policy space that you have to selectively raise the tariff to protect a particular vulnerable sector is virtually reduced to 0. So, not only you will have low tariff regime, but that low tariff regime with no policy scope for variation in case the hurt takes place.
Which sectors do you think are most vulnerable?
Textile was supposed to be a very competitive industry in India. That is why they had the MFA. Today you see the textile industry in India. You have the imports coming from China, you have the imports coming from Bangladesh. Even your traditional industry which you considered very efficient, we are exposed to possibility of a competition from the countries like China. And China, there is no sector that we can really say is as competitive as that, whether it is electronics, whether it is manufacturers, whether it is even the images of Lord Ganesha. Everything is coming here and it is very competitive. So, I can't say that these sectors are very efficient, therefore, we need not worry about it.
Every sector is potentially vulnerable.
Almost, but the fact of the matter is that 10% tariff, particularly for small industry products, will be rendering them very vulnerable to competition coming from places like China, places like Thailand. So, we have this situation, and NAMA actually we have more or less accepted this regime. So, this is another area in which dilution has taken place.